Order. Diane Abbott to move the motion.
Madam Chair, I am proud to have called this debate today and to be able to stand up for the disabled and the effect, the catastrophic effect, that the proposed cuts in personal independence payments will have on them. It is the week after the council elections and the by-election in Runcorn, which proved disastrous for at least two major parties. And the issue on everyone's lips, the cause of much of the disaffection, was welfare cuts, specifically personal independence payments. But first, I would like to thank in advance all those who will take part in this debate, all those watching, all those who are campaigning against the cuts in the outside world, and above all, the disabled community itself, which day by day shows exemplary resilience and courage. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, in her spring statement, raised the curtain on a series of welfare cuts. The health element of the universal credit will be cut by 50% and frozen for new claimants. The OBR has outlined that the planned cuts to disability benefits will reduce PIP for at least 800,000 claimants and cut health-related universal credit payments for 3 million families. And this is just the beginning.
On that point, I thank my right honourable friend, because many of my Slough constituents are extremely concerned about proposed welfare cuts, especially personal independent payments and other disability benefits. But unlike the previous Conservative Lib Dem coalition, which embarked upon austerity, unlike previous Conservative governments of recent years, which became characterised as the nasty party, does my right honourable friend agree that it is the job of this government, it is indeed a moral duty of theirs, to protect the most vulnerable so that they can lead a dignified and independent life?
I entirely agree with my colleague. The government insists that the rising disability benefits bill means something must be done. But in a recent report, the New Economics Foundation revealed that the disability benefits bill has risen because there has been a rise in the number of disabled people and a rise in deprivation. But as we learnt in David Cameron's round of austerity, cuts have consequences which severely limit or even eliminate the supposed savings altogether.
In my constituency of Birmingham Perry Bar, notwithstanding the forecast of these cuts being conducted, people are already suffering because DWP or HMRC is already trying to clamp down and suspending benefits such as PIP, which is causing just immense anxiety for disabled and vulnerable adults, which are having to now seek an appeal whilst their benefits are being cut. Does the honourable member, right honourable member, agree that an equality impact assessment needs to be conducted now, as opposed to just simply cutting $5 billion in the near future?
I entirely agree with the honourable gentleman. We do need a quality impact assessment now. And I cannot understand why the government is introducing these random welfare benefit cuts without allowing MPs to understand fully what the consequences of them will be. And the fact that the proposed welfare cuts come on top of the cut to the winter fuel allowance and the failure to raise the child benefit ceiling makes everything worse. The furious response to their proposed welfare cuts, particularly the cuts to personal independence payments, seem to have come as a surprise to the government. PIP is a benefit intended to help people with the extra costs of living with a health condition or a disability. Unfortunately, some people, including some ministers, talk about it as if it were a handout.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way. Does the right honourable member agree with me that PIP is not an income? And those councils that count PIP as an income should be called out. In Leicester City Council, they are calculating PIP as an income, and therefore the people who are applying for PIP are reducing and not getting the council support tax. So, especially people like Jason, who's going to be £900 worse off in my constituency.
PIP is certainly not an income, and I imagine that the Minister will be in contact with Leicester Council to try and understand what they think they are doing. The new point system that the government is suggesting for people to qualify for the maximum PIP is particularly concerning. It will mean, for instance, that people who cannot wash below their waist could lose points, lose benefits, and be expected to find a job. Focus groups have been revolted when they hear this. The country's anger at these cuts boiled over last week in a spectacular fashion with a by-election in Runcorn where Labour lost its 16th safest seat.
The House is full today, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, because it's quite clearly a massive issue. One of the things, when PIP is assessed as an effective lifeline to help maintain wellness and independence, and in many cases employment, so more does need to be done. Furthermore, if the claimant no longer qualifies for the daily living component, then any carer will also lose their direct access to a carer's allowance. That's a loss of £10,000 on top of the other money as well. This is a minefield for those who are disabled, for those who depend on PIPs to continue to have some quality of life. Does the Honourable Lady agree that really the Minister today has to give us many, many answers and has to change the policy?
It is indeed a cruel and brutal system. It needs reform, but it doesn't need cuts. Elements in the Labour Party seem to want to claim that the loss of the by-election in Runcorn and the fact that Labour lost 2/3 of the seats we were defending was all about immigrants. But surveys of voters found, far from it being all about immigrants, the single most important reason for vote switching was anger at the government cutting the winter fuel allowance and welfare cuts like the cuts proposed for PIP. Immigration comes well down the list. Labour people who went out knocking on doors said two issues came up over and over again: cuts to the winter fuel payments and the personal independence payments. But despite the catastrophic results last week, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has made it clear that nothing will deter him from pushing ahead with these cuts. So far, his only concession is to say he will go further and faster. In my own constituency of Hackney North and Stoke Newington, there were well over 8,000 people on either personal independence payment or the disability living allowance. This translates to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of men and women nationwide, whose fury will only mount as month by month they find their payments shrinking or disappearing altogether. The Labour leadership have not helped their case for cutting PIP by putting forward a set of contradictory arguments. On the one hand, they insist they are helping the disabled by putting them back to work, but on the other hand, they say this cut will save £9 billion. Well, you can't do both. Putting disabled people into rewarding sustained employment, which we would all support, means spending money on training, therapy, childcare. In the short run, putting disabled people into jobs will not save money, it will actually cost more. The only certain way that cutting PIP saves the billions of pounds that the governments want is by making PIP recipients live on less. And this is something ministers claim that they do not want to do.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way. And I really thank her for the powerful speech that she is making. I wanted to briefly draw attention to some figures from the PCS union about their members working in the DWP, including in the job centre. Almost 50% of PCS union members working in the DWP claim the very benefits that they process. Many of them rely on PIP to work, which I think further underlines the point the member was making about the folly of cutting the very benefits that enable people working for the government to deliver these policies would not be able to do so if those are cut. So does the right honourable member agree with me that those cuts will not only punish sick and disabled people, but that includes those working for the government in this policy area?
Far from removing PIP enabling the government to put people into work, it will actually stop people working because they depend on PIP for the extra costs of going to work. But perhaps the most preposterous argument for cutting disability payments is that it is the moral choice. This is obviously nonsense. In what universe is slashing benefits for the disabled moral? No one is taken in by that, not even those who think that all benefit claimants are scroungers. And you do wonder.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. I have a constituent who has 2 sons suffering with cystic fibrosis, and that condition means that they have to be on a high-calorie, high-fat diet, and the cost of food is much more than the ordinary shop. On top of that, the additional cost of buying medication is something that my constituent has to bear, together with the additional costs of food, and also the loss of income that results in having to be a carer for the 2 children means that there are additional costs involved. Does my honourable friend agree that we actually need a system whereby PIP provides for individuals like the 2 sons of my constituent, and so that young children, the honourable member mentioned the need to look after our children, so that children can also have the support to lead good quality lives?
I entirely agree. And furthermore, I would say, it seems to me ministers haven't really looked into the costs which PIP is covering. Otherwise, they couldn't be talking about slashing it in this way. And you wonder if it ever occurs to the government that voters will begin to notice that whenever they want money, they take it from the most vulnerable, old people, poor children, and now the disabled, but suggest a wealth tax and they recoil in horror. Yet, a 2% levy on men and women whose own assets are worth more than 10 million would affect only 0.4% of the UK population and raise £24 billion a year. Politics is the language of choices, and sadly, this government is making a conscious choice to balance its books on the back of people on welfare in general and the disabled in particular.
My right honourable friend give way. I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree and share my concerns that by the government's own estimates, 300,000 people will be pushed into relative poverty by 2030, and as a result, they're actually going to need to rely on council services, which are already severely oversubscribed? And does she agree that these cuts without funding for council emergency services will only be a disastrous combination which actually risks exasperating the pressures faced by our local councils already?
There is no question that my honourable friend is correct, and these cuts will put even more pressure on local authorities who are already in difficulties. But all this talk about getting disabled people into jobs, what jobs? The areas of employment where there are labour shortages tend to be minimum wage, like social care, or seasonal, like agricultural work. And the Department of Work and Pensions' own figures indicate there are around 102,000 registered vacancies currently. Of these, only 807 can be done completely remotely. 127 employers are what the DWP describes as disability confident, and just 10 of those jobs are part-time. So where are these jobs the government wants to coerce the disabled into? And what employer? The PIP claimants that the government wants to force back to work may have physical disabilities, but they may also be severely depressed or have mental health problems. But most employers will not tolerate the intermittent patterns of employment and long periods out of the labour market that come with these type of health problems. Furthermore, there's very little evidence that cutting benefits boost employment, a point made by a group of concerned charities recently. And ministers seem to miss the point, as a member said earlier. They seem to miss the point that PIP is paid to disabled people regardless whether or not they are in work. This means that many of the women and men the government is taking their PIP off will already have jobs. Supporters of the government's cuts claim that all too often men and women on welfare are taking the mickey, I'm quoting from a minister there, or making a lifestyle choice. People who describe welfare as a lifestyle choice obviously do not actually know many people who live on welfare. The poor housing, the struggle to pay for the basics, the humiliation they often endure mean that this is not a lifestyle anybody would choose.
I thank the honourable member for the passionate speech she's making, and in particular for highlighting the real human impact of these cuts. Over 1 million disabled people were forced to use food banks last year, while for many others, basics like affording transport to hospital appointments will be jeopardised by these cuts. So doesn't this only emphasise and underline the case that the honourable member was making, that this is a political choice, and that asking the very wealthiest in society to pay a bit more in tax would be the moral thing to do?
It is indeed a political choice, and I would prefer my government to introduce a wealth tax or some taxation system which asks the very wealthy to pay a little more than taking money away from the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society. But the government refuses to accept that there is anything wrong with cutting benefits for the disabled. Instead, they say there has been a communication problem. Some of us have tried explaining to Downing Street that they could employ the best communicators in the world. These welfare cuts will be impossible to sell to the public and will undermine Labour's position in communities.
Recently, I met with many furious constituents, outraged by both the cuts already made and those still to come. Nearly 10,000 people in Blackburn rely on PIP, and I joined the member in condemning these cold-hearted and cruel cuts that leave people fearing that they can't even heat their homes or eat.
I entirely agree. And I would add that if ministers think that these recent local election results are bad, wait until next year's council elections. The elections will be in Scotland, Wales, big city conurbations like Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, and in every single London borough. But there are persons in number 10 who believe that we didn't go far enough. A nameless number 10 advisor said, and I quote, "We didn't go big enough the first time round." It's a fairness issue. Another nameless government source said, "We should have done it all in one hit. We didn't go far enough." You wonder how many poor people, disabled people, these people ever meet or know. The government should drop the cuts to the winter fuel payment and review the personal independence payment. Consult with the disabled and organisations that work with the disabled and genuinely improve and reform it.
Specifically around that, I think it's really important that the government works on co-production so that disabled people are involved in the decision-making processes. And around the interaction with the Scottish Government, the Government have said they're cancelling work capability assessments and relying on the PIP assessment to make the decisions. In Scotland, we don't have PIP assessments, we've got ADP assessments. Will she join me in encouraging the Minister to ensure that those plans and that clarity is set out before the welfare bill comes to Parliament, because otherwise we're taking a decision on something that we have no idea of the impact of?
We undoubtedly need more information before we can meaningfully vote on these proposals. Some of us are old enough to remember Mrs. Thatcher and her poll tax, and it was her undoing. It is not too late to drop the winter fuel tax and the cuts to PIP, and I plead with my government to do so.
Hear, hear. I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. As there are so many people wishing to speak today, and I would like to give everyone the opportunity to speak, I will have to, unfortunately, have a 1.5 minute timer to begin with, because simply won't be able to get everyone in otherwise, and I know that everyone feels strongly about this. So the question is that this House has considered personal independence payment and disabled people. I'd like to call Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr. Alan Khan, and I commend the Right Honourable Member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington on securing this very important debate. Young people who are battling cancer are being failed by the system. They are forced to wait on average 8 long months before they can access PIP, including a 3-month qualifying period that applies even after a confirmed cancer diagnosis. In that time, these young patients and their families face an extra £5,000 in out-of-pocket costs on top of the emotional, physical and psychological burden of the cancer itself. Does the Minister understand the consequences of these reforms for young people already enduring the fight of their young lives? Will he commit to working with his ministerial colleagues to ensure that the arbitrary wait times are scrapped, a medical diagnosis alone is accepted as sufficient evidence for PIP eligibility, and the system is reshaped not to punish but to protect?
Thank you. Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Harold Wilson once said, the Labour Party is a moral crusade or it's nothing. And we need to be clear, as millions of people outside this place are clear, that to try and balance the books on the backs of the poor and disabled is fundamentally immoral, is fundamentally un-Labour. And the Prime Minister and the government need not to plough ahead apace with this immoral, appalling plan, but instead to drop it now. Let's be clear. someone who needs assistance to cut up their own food, and who needs assistance to wash themselves, and who needs assistance to dress themselves, would currently get a personal independence payment, but thanks to the government's proposals, could lose that personal independence payment. That's completely appalling. And these cuts were cruel enough when the OBR estimated that 800,000 people would lose PIP. But a new Freedom of Information answer from the DWP estimates 1.3 million people could lose PIP. The government should come clean and say what the figure is. It's outrageous to have a vote without knowing figures. And so I would say quite clearly, if the government doesn't drop this immoral plan, I'll be voting against these cuts to disability benefits, and I know that many of my colleagues will be doing so as well.
Edward Morello.
Too many disabled people in West Dorset are living in fear that the support they rely on through the PIP payment would be taken away, or that loved ones might not qualify. In recent weeks, I've heard from 190 constituents, each sharing their distress about the plans. One of my constituents, Barbara, is 65. She's lived with juvenile idiopathic arthritis since she was 3. She's experienced constant pain, multiple surgeries, and increased disability throughout her life. And yet she worked in social services for many years and never claimed employment and support allowance. Her PIP award helped her fund the support she needs to give her independence, mobility equipment, home adjustments, private care when the NHS service falls short. And yet, despite scoring 3 points in some areas on her most recent assessment and scoring on virtually all areas of daily living, Barbara would not qualify for any support under the proposed changes. For constituents like Barbara, this is a terrifying prospect. As she herself put it, PIP is not a benefit, it is a tool for survival. As we debate the potential changes to PIP, I hope we will remember her words. Disabled people and their carers deserve dignity. They deserve to be seen not as a cost to be managed, but as valued citizens, worthy of respect and entitled to fairness and compassion from this House.
Ascol.
Thank you, Chair. Everything is hard in body or in mind. The barriers, the pain, the dejection, the not being believed, and even when you are, the assumptions made for which only lived experience can speak. The effort to live or just get up and face the day. The effort to prove that your experiences are real, the costs. And after 14 years of battling, here we are, pathways to work, taking money, agency, dignity, independence and the essence of life itself. And I fear, like many do here, that people will take their life. Once again crushed by a system which fails to see, fails to believe, points the finger, not offers the hand, turning hope to despair as poverty, dependency, and if not physical, most definitely psychological harm awaits. Colleagues, we are better than this. Let's vow to stop such pernicious cuts and rewrite the story with the voices, experiences and hope of disabled people. And even if tasks, time and place is able to be accommodated, work is not always the answer, and we don't even have the diagnosis, understanding, evidence, nor answers from Charlie Mayfield's report. I will be voting against these cuts because I am Labour and because disabled people matter.
Anne Davies.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. £4.5 billion of the so-called savings will come from restricting eligibility to the daily living element of personal independent payments, and restricting this will result in an average financial loss of £4,500 each for our constituents. It's not a benefit for people out of work, and with 1 in 5 people of the workforce being disabled in Wales, taking away PIP or the option of PIP from disabled workers will leave people worse off. Often, post-industrial areas have a higher proportion of working-age people receiving PIP, and they will be disproportionately affected by these changes. Recent policy and practice data has shown exactly that. Wales will suffer 3 times the economic impact and with twice as many affected residents as London and the South East. And 4 out of 10 of the most affected local authority areas are in Wales. In Carmarthenshire alone, over £17 million will be lost due to PIP changes, with nearly 4,000 people losing eligibility within my constituency. Data and analysis by organisations such as Policy and Practice are crucial for our understanding, especially since the UK Government has so far refused Plaid Cymru's call for an impact assessment in Wales, and even Labour's First Minister of Wales has requested a Wales-specific impact assessment, but this has been battered away and refused. This is not the change Wales and the UK Government voted for, and they've recently made that crystal clear.
Few years. The Minister has actually met them. They struggle as it is to manage on carers allowance, but the government's proposals, 150,000 carers will lose the carers allowance. Already 1.2 million carers live in poverty, 400,000 live in deep poverty. I'm fearful about the impact of what this will have on these carers who have devoted their lives to looking after family members. A few months ago, I hosted a drop-in for Siobhan O'Dwyer, who's from the University of Birmingham. Her team have been researching the risk of suicides and suicide incidents amongst carers. And for those MPs who did attend, I think most of us were shocked at the scale of the risk that there is at the moment and at the scale of incidents. I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified that these proposals will put more carers, push them over the edge, and people will suffer. And as we saw in the last round of austerity under the last government, when these changes occurred, people lost their lives. So that's why I don't like to do this with my own government when it's so new within its first year. I'll be voting against, and I'm hoping the government will think again and withdraw these proposals.
Yeah. Jess Brown-Fuller.
With limited time, Chair, I will share the voices today of some of the 200 constituents that have been in touch with me about these proposed changes to personal independence payments, like one worried father who contacted me on behalf of his son, Richard, who lives with functional neurological disorder. Robert told me how vital PIP is to Richard, who will never be able to work again. They feel completely abandoned by these proposed cuts, and after countless attempts to engage with the Department for Work and Pensions, they now feel ignored and disillusioned. Or James, who lives with multiple mental health conditions which have left him hospitalised several times in the past. He wrote to me saying, "Nearly all my PIP goes towards paying for my guardian angel carer. Without that support, I would have to move into a supported living arrangement, which would make my mental health problems much worse, and I would end up in hospital again. I don't want to lose my independence, as I am just managing with the support I have now. It is clear that for James, PIP is the difference between managing or entering crisis." Then there's Susan. She's the sole carer and appointee for several disabled members of her family. Under these proposals, at least 2 of them would lose all of the support that they get. She wrote saying, "I honestly am broken. Life is hopeless. I can't feed my family if these cuts go through. Please join us in fighting these cuts." My constituents in Chichester are not asking for special treatment. They're just asking to live with dignity, fairness, and importantly, independence, which is what PIP gives them. This is exactly the opposite of what this government claims to want to achieve.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Dr. Allen-Carr. It's a pleasure to serve here today under your chairship. Many of my constituents in Morecambe and Lunesdale have contacted me with serious concerns about the changes proposed to PIP. If we put aside for one moment the human cost of this worry, we already know what happens when you take money away from early intervention and preventative support. You don't save money, you simply shift the cost. And more often than not, you end up increasing it. We've got evidence for this. When DLA was replaced with PIP in 2013, people with multiple sclerosis were often taken off the benefit. The MS Society investigated the effects of these changes on 2,500 people with MS who lost the higher rate of DLA. And unsurprisingly, they found that they were relying more on NHS services, particularly GPs and A&Es. This cost in 1 year alone, just for 2,500 people, £7.7 million. Just for 2,500 people, just in GP and A&E costs. We're still dealing with the real human cost of 14 years of Conservative austerity, Conservative cuts to health and social care. We have to learn from the failure of those policies and do something differently. This party was elected on a promise of change, and it's one that I stand by, and I stand by my government. But no one is denying that our welfare system needs serious reform. This shouldn't come at the cost of disabled people. Thank you.
Tessa Munt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like, particularly in response to all of the letters that I've had and the emails from my constituents, particularly to focus on PIP and the effect on the 1.3 million people who are suffering from ME and long COVID. The additional criteria for PIP award of having 4 points in one descriptor disproportionately affects people with ME and long COVID because they reach their 8 points currently with a spread of low points across many, many descriptors. So I'm particularly concerned about that. And the impact of the abolition of the work capability assessment and the focus on PIP and the extra difficulty for people with ME and long COVID accessing PIP is a double whammy, as they did better under the work capability assessment because that could accommodate the fluctuating nature of ME and the reality of post-exertion malaise as a distinctive aspect of ME. PIP doesn't accommodate that nature of that disability and for those who suffer with this condition. The Green Paper takes two positive moves, which I potentially support. One is the redesign of the PIP assessment, and the second is the recognition that many people will have lifelong disability and cannot return to work, and there should be some accommodation for them through special funding. So I'll ask how it is that the Minister might consider people with ME and long COVID when looking at the results of that redesign. Thank you.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard from the government itself that by 2030, 800,000 fewer people will get the daily living component of PIP. That's 370,000 people who are already on it. Average loss, 4,500. 3 million people will see the health-related universal credit cut, some as much by £3,000. The consequences? Rising poverty, greater food bank reliance and mounting pressure on public services. And the government claims that these will be offset by incentives to work. Yet estimates from the Learning and Work Institute and IFS suggest that only 1 to 3% impacted. Perhaps tens of thousands out of millions may gain employment. That leaves 97% worse off. And as the MP for Middlesbrough and Thornaby East, I've asked repeated questions about how this is going to impact on my constituents, how many will lose entitlement, how many will fall into poverty. I've asked at PMQs, I've tabled written questions for equality, employer and poverty impact assessments to be published before legislation has been introduced. I've asked whether disabled people and carers will be consulted on these changes, like the one requiring claimants to score 4 points. I haven't received those responses, and yet this is going to proceed with this urgency. And Chair, I've just got to say that this is policy making in the dark. I'll be voting against because it's always country first and party second.
Ayub Khan.
Chair, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I also extend my extreme gratefulness to the Right Honourable Member for Hackney North in tabling this debate, because thousands in my constituency will be impacted by the proposed cuts to PIP and the wider benefits. They're not just numbers on a balance sheet. They are the daily lives of real people. PIP is a vital lifeline for those living with disabilities and long-term health conditions. It helps cover the extra costs that many of us never have to think about. Mobility aids, transport, specialist care. Cutting this support doesn't just tighten budgets, it strips away independence, but more importantly, dignity. We must ask ourselves, what kind of society do we want to be? One that turns away from its most vulnerable, or one that lifts them up, ensuring that disability does not mean poverty, isolation or fear. Behind every efficiency saving is a person, a mother skipping meals so a disabled son can get to an appointment, a veteran left waiting months for a reassessment, a young woman terrified for losing the support she needs to work part-time and stay independent. This is not just about fairness, it's about justice, compassion and basic human rights. So I ask the Minister today, halt these proposed cuts, review PIP with empathy, not austerity, and build a system that supports, not punishes, our most needy in our society.
Kat Eccles.
Thank you, Dr.
Alencar. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, and I thank my honourable friend for Hackney North and Stoke Newton for bringing this really important debate today. I wish to place on record my grave concerns about the proposals put forward by this government to change the eligibility criteria for PIP. When the HMRC has written off £27 billion of debts over the last 5 years, saying they're uncollectible, and the UK is still failing to act on UN tax avoidance guidance, losing us millions of pounds every year, it's impossible to accept that targeting disabled people is the answer. No consideration has been given to the knock-on effect to local government. In my area, we have a Conservative-run Dudley Council, which has made over £42 million in cuts, which includes loss of services for carers, mental health, domestic abuse, dementia, as well as slashing funding to the charitable sector. So where are people supposed to turn for help? The narrative being created is that of scroungers and cheats, when in reality, disabled people are fighting tooth and nail for every little scrap that they get. And as one constituent told me, being disabled is a full-time job. The Green Paper suggests that disabled people will be supported to retrain or access voluntary opportunities. This is patronising. They have qualifications, they have careers. 1 in 3 of us will become disabled in our lifetime, and I will vote against these proposals.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Chair, can I commend the Honourable Lady for Hackney North and Stoke Newton and our courage of all, by the way, who have made a very clear commitment, and I thank them for that there, and I mean that quite honestly. I have a wonderful lady in my office as our benefits advisor who is fantastic at talking people through the PIP and the benefits process, supporting them with their filling in their forms, and the very, very stressful process it is. The point system already can be challenging, often lead to mandatory reconditions and appeals, so it's very easy for me to understand why so many people are worried about this. One of the criteria changes, they will introduce a requirement that claimants score 4 points at least one of the 10 activities to qualify for the component. This change could result in some existing claimants no longer meeting the eligibility requirement, which could impact them severely month to month. I've also had a chat with Partners UK, and they've told me, and I quote, for example, this degenerative condition incurs average extra cost of over some £7,500 per year. So PIP is a crucial part of that payment for them. Again, all these people, and we haven't much more time to say in this here, there are clearly more study needed to be done to assess how these changes could truly impact people. So today I speak, Madam Chair, on behalf of the 200,000 people across Northern Ireland that this will ultimately impact. And I look to the Minister for greater clarity that action will only be backed when will be taken when backed up by evidence. Minister, you're a great friend of us all, but today we need answers.
Nadia Whittam.
Government claims that proposed cuts are about getting disabled people into work, but has provided no evidence that they will result in significantly more disabled people in work. And even if they did, there would still be some disabled people who would be unable to work, and they deserve support too. Under these proposals, many of them would not receive it. What these proposed disability benefit cuts will mean is more poverty, suffering and hardship for disabled people. One young person living with mental illness told Just Treatment, who I hosted in Parliament yesterday, "I feel suicidal when I get caught up in the thoughts of losing this life-changing support." Another says she will not be able to access food, shelter and vital care for her condition. A third young person says, "I am terrified they will take my PIP away, that I will end up homeless and my only option will be suicide." We should be in no doubt that these proposals will cost lives. That's not hyperbolic. The benefit system has already been a key factor in the deaths of disabled people, like my constituent Philippa Day, who tragically took an overdose and was found next to a letter from the DWP refusing a home assessment visit. If the government goes through with these disability benefit cuts, it will be making a huge mistake, which the public will not forgive us for. We must be true to our values as a party and stand up for the whole of the working class, including disabled people, whether they're in work or not. It's not too late for the government to drop these cuts. If it doesn't, I will vote against them.
Adam Dance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 7.9% of working-age adults in Yeovil claim PIP, which is higher than the average of the South West. For my constituents, PIP is not some kind of luxury. It allows them to live their lives, manage their disabilities, go to work and do a daily task people without disabilities can do. For example, one constituent of mine told me we're terrified of becoming homeless if these cuts go ahead. The government's proposals are likely to result in rising child poverty, and that's just not good enough. Many of the changes detailed in the government's new Green Paper seem to be financially driven. This is simply wrong. Labour, do something about this. The assessment process has to change, especially over the phone assessment, which has been constituents of mine unable to express their needs and get support they are owed. The government cannot make decisions about disabled people without consulting them. Over the last decade, we've seen underinvestment in our social care system. That has to change, because if it doesn't, there will be no meaningful drop in the welfare bill. In conclusion, Madam Chair, it is of course right that we bring down the welfare bill, make Britain healthier and give all our constituents meaningful work. But that cannot come at the expense of the most vulnerable.
Debbie Abrahams.
I'm going to be very brief. I just want to draw members' attention to a recent report that was published on Friday, which provides evidence of a constituency impact. And it shows very clearly the impact in northern areas. So an average of £269 per working adult in the northeast, similar in the north west and Yorkshire and Humber. This cumulative impact, that's on a per person basis, but the cumulative impact can be tens of millions of pounds for each constituency. So the impact on local economies, which I don't think we've explored in any great detail, is quite significant. So my own Oldham East and Saddleworth constituency, £15 million a year will be lost from that, from my constituency, which will have a huge impact on our local economy. The very important point is as well that the financial losses are highest in the constituencies with the lowest life expectancies, which means health inequalities are likely to widen even further. Thanks, Madam.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you. Millions of lives impacted overnight by a single policy. It's absolutely indefensible. It will drive more disabled people into poverty, push children further into poverty, further strain public health, and leave those with the greatest need behind. We should be helping those with the greatest need in our society, not abandoning them. And let me be clear, the 4-point rule is a cruel test dressed up as a reform. It means people with complex, overlapping needs who score few points in many areas could be cut off. These are real people with anxiety, chronic pain or fluctuating conditions. If they don't tick a box, they don't get help. The system should protect, not punish. And as outlined by a number of speakers, a 2% tax on wealth above 10 million would raise 24 billion a year, over 5 times what the DWP hopes to save. So let's be honest, this is not about sustainability, it's a political choice. And Madam Chair, we cannot weaken the very foundation that protects those with the greatest need. This is a moral line we cannot and must not cross.
Roberto Addy.
To my right honourable friend for bringing this important debate. She is always right and was certainly right today. And like many members, I have been contacted by hundreds of my constituents who are angry and anxious about the government's proposed cuts. They make no sense and people will be pushed further into poverty. And there's also no evidence they're actually going to get people into work, rather an abundance of evidence of how devastating they will be. My biggest fear overall is that we may ultimately count the cost of these cuts in lost lives. Lest we forget that study that attributed 330,000 excess deaths in Britain between 2012 and 2019 to the last round of austerity cuts. There's no denying that a number of people who are claiming sickness and disability benefits are rising, but we can't ignore the fact that increasing claimants are linked to our ageing population and a decade of underinvestment in our health services. If the government's going to recoup costs from somewhere, they should cast their gaze away from some of the most vulnerable in our society and instead look at those with the broadest shoulders. Disabled people already bore the brunt of the cuts under the last government, while UK billionaires saw their wealth triple. These cuts represent the worst of all worlds, and they will plunge disabled people into poverty. They will fail to increase employment, they will make people sicker, and reliance on the NHS will increase, and they will not win the government any favours with the electorate. At the last general election, people voted for change. They voted for a Labour government that would be more compassionate than the previous Conservative one. So I agree with my right honourable friend. It's not too late to change course. The government can and should reverse these plans.
Ian Byrne.
Madam Chair, last week I held a citizens' assembly in my constituency on the government's plans. Dozens of disabled people told me how frightened they were. Now, Lawrence, who led the debate, a disabled man against the cuts, said parliamentarians are legislating to assist my suicide while legislating to stop me from being able to live. His words, not mine. But the fear in his words cut through the room. I held a vote at the end of the meeting. Overwhelmingly, every single person in that room voted against these cuts. If these proposed cuts are brought to Parliament, just like my friendly member for Hayes and Arlington said about Tory cuts a decade ago, I will swim through vomit to vote against them. I cannot express to the Minister the scale of the devastation this will have on disabled people in my constituency and indeed the country. We know from the government's own analysis that they would drive 250,000 more people into poverty and many others deeper into deprivation. This is not what the Labour Party was formed to do. So I conclude with this appeal to the Minister. We were elected last summer on a promise to change. These cruel cuts are not the change people voted for. Last week, we saw the people's judgment of unpopular, unnecessary and immoral cuts. So for the sake of disabled people in Liverpool West Derby, for the sake of basic decency and morality, abandon these cruel cuts, deliver the progressive change our country needs and stop austerity.
Steve Riverdon.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr Alan Khan. And can I also thank my right honourable friend, the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, for securing this vitally important debate. I'd like to speak about working people. My constituency, Montgomeryshire and Glyndŵr, holds a proud industrial heritage. Some may claim the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution is Telford, but I would encourage them to read up on Bersham. In 2010, we witnessed the closure of our large chemical plant, once the world's leading producer of fennel in 1920. We were also home to the last coal mine in North Wales, located in Rhostyllen, which closed in the late 1980s. As is the case with many post-industrial areas, our region suffers from higher deprivation and increased rates of illness. Dr Alan Khan, when I look at these proposed cuts, especially the unjust tightening of eligibility criteria for personal independence payment, I'm filled with a deep concern for many of my constituents. Wales already has the highest poverty rates among disabled people in the UK and a greater reliance on PIP than any other parts of the country. These cuts will hit Wales particularly hard, and they will hit my constituents particularly hard too. I will vote against this. The government must withdraw these proposals and ensure disabled voices are at the forefront of all future reforms. We urgently need a welfare system that supports people when they need it most, so that they continue to live, work and contribute to society, not one that pushes them further into poverty.
Thank you, Dr Alan Khan. A strong social security system is not just the cornerstone of a welfare state, it's a hallmark of a decent society. But exactly because the system is so essential, we must also safeguard its future. It is our duty not just to help the most vulnerable today, but to make sure that the system is sustainable so it can offer that support tomorrow. That is the central challenge when we consider PIP. The numbers receiving it have more than doubled in the last 5 years since the pandemic. More than 1,000 new people are joining it every single day. While health conditions have become more widespread in the years following COVID, due mainly to the Conservatives' terrible mismanagement of and underinvestment in the NHS, the numbers on health-related benefits like PIP have, on some metrics, increased at twice the rate of underlying health conditions. Those of us who believe in the welfare state cannot simply ignore this issue, and neither can we posit speculative new revenue sources to wish the problem away. Some of my honourable friends have mentioned a wealth tax as a possible solution. I say to them gently, if only it were that easy. No country in the world has ever successfully had a wealth tax. Not my words, but those of Paul Johnson, head of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. If we are to protect the system, we must not seek to freeze it in aspic or to ignore the problems it faces. Instead, we must confront the problems head-on and seek reforms that will allow the institutions of the welfare state and the values they encode to endure. Thank you.
Anne Gelderd.
Under your chairship. Many people in South East Cornwall are deeply worried about what these proposals mean for them and their families. The government's consultation is still open, and I urge residents to participate and respond, alongside the work that I and colleagues do here undertake daily by raising the issue in public and holding meetings. The consultation is a vital opportunity to people to participate. In South East Cornwall, 9.3% of working age adults are claiming PIP, well above the South West average. And behind every one of these numbers is a person, a neighbour, a parent, a carer, a young adult trying to build a life in a rural part of the country where access to services and transport is already difficult. The most common reason for making these claims is anxiety, depression, learning disabilities and others. So it's clear we must do more to support working age adults who can work to do so. And that means quality mental health services, better provision for our families. And the cost of living continues to hit hard in South East Cornwall. So I welcome the government's commitment to raise the standard universal credit allowance above inflation and to introduce the new health premium for those who will never be able to work. But I ask the Minister, what is being done to ensure that those affected are protected from being pushed into poverty? And will the Minister commit to reviewing how to ensure more accurate decisions are made in the first place to reduce stress, deliver better for our communities and reduce costs? Ultimately, South East Cornwall people rely on these services, and that's who I work for every day and will continue to fight for as their MP.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Dr. Ruana. Sorry, I haven't got my I'll tell you what, I'll put my specs on and reset that there. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and it's a great credit to my honourable friend from Hackney and Stewington North for bringing this to the chamber. Listen, there's not one MP in here, by the way, was elected to make people poorer. Not one. And if you are, you should be a million, you should feel a million shames. Look at yourself in the mirror. I look at the right honourable gentleman from East Ham, a good friend of mine, tremendous servant of this house. I wonder what's went wrong. Why, when the rich are getting richer, the very rich are getting very rich, there's more billionaires than ever, more millionaires than ever, are we taking people on pennies? Taking away their livelihood, making their lives so miserable. In my constituency of Blythe and Ashton, it's one of the bottom 10% in terms of social deprivation. I've got 10,467 people dependent for their livelihood. They're not living a life of luxury. They're dependent on the PIP support just to live. Yes, of course.
And earlier in my speech, I forgot to say that I will be voting against these measures if the government pushes ahead. Will he be doing the same?
Thank you very much for my honourable friend for giving way. I'll definitely be voting against these measures. I wasn't voted in to make my people poorer, for heaven's sake. Reduce support and benefits. There are some decent things in this bill with regard to getting people back to work, but the threat of a blanket reduction of benefits is absolutely scandalous. It's not Labour. And by the way, Dr. Alan Khan, I've got to say, will not take any lectures, by the way, from the Tories who've said categorically that they would double the amount of money that we're looking to withdraw from the benefit system. Probably up to £15 billion. That's what Neil lectures at Deerhope, by the way. So I'll be definitely voting against these. I'm a voice for people who need a voice in this place, and we need to oppose it.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, for securing this important debate. Chair, I totally agree that the welfare system needs reform. There is something seriously wrong when a person who cannot work at one point in time is written off work forever and is not supported to re-enter the labour market, having failed the work capability assessment. And this is the flawed system the government is rightly aiming to address. But I want to use this short time to express my real concerns about the proposed tightening of PIP eligibility criteria. The truth is that many people who currently qualify for PIP will no longer qualify under these reforms, despite having very significant care needs. Take Jane, one of my constituents, who has Crohn's disease. This condition significantly impacts her daily life, affecting food preparation, washing, dressing. It leads to anxiety when interacting with others. She uses her PIP to buy more expensive free-from foods. She uses her PIP to buy petrol, allowing her to use a car to go to work. And she is seriously worried that if she loses her PIP, she won't be able to work if these reforms are implemented. And I've had example after example from constituents where it seems from a reasonable perspective of a member of the public, care needs would be significant despite the removal of PIP. The Prime Minister was absolutely right this morning to say that the principle is that the most vulnerable will be protected. At the moment, it seems to me that we're not meeting that test.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan. And as the parent of a child with cerebral palsy and complex disabilities, I know what it's like to be a carer. I'm a carer every day, and I will be a carer until my dying day. And it's incumbent on me, therefore, to speak on behalf of carers in this debate. You know, I have been there. I'm privileged now because of the income I earn, but I have been there when you do worry about that struggle of daily caring and the cost of paying your bills and your mortgage every day. And I know how many of my constituents in Bexley-upon-Crayford are stuck in that bubble that you get yourself into, where you're stuck on a mixture of carers allowance and PIP, and you'll often become disabled yourself because of the mental cost or the physical cost of that care. What I would quickly say in the Carers Trust analysis is that they believe that 28% of carers are already living in poverty, and they particularly asked that there's a detailed impact assessment to take place specifically on the carers community, and I'd ask the Minister to comment on that when he sums up. And I've said this continuing this debate. I believe this is a policy driven by the DWP and the Treasury alone, and there is it's incumbent on us to ensure that other government departments, the Department for Communities and Local Government, Department for Health, Department for Education, Department for Transport, come up with proposals that also support the measures. And I'll ask the Minister to comment on that, because if we're truly going to get disabled people to access work and to support carers, we need a strong cross-government departmental strategy on this measure.
I'm going to call the final backbench speaker, and following that, it will be Steve Darling. So I'd like to call Chris Bloor.
Thank you, Dr. Ali Khan. PIP and its predecessors have and never been an unemployment benefit, but a critical aid to supporting people in and out of work to live independent lives. We know that being disabled or suffering from a chronic health condition means you face many additional costs. Estimated by Scope, households with a disabled inhabitant need to spend an additional £1,000 a month just to secure the same standard of living of those without. Prepared food, deliveries, specialised clothes and technology required to aid normal everyday living or just simply to get to work all come at a greater cost. Right now, we know that these households are disproportionately impacted by the cost of living crisis, with Trussell estimating that 3 in every 4 households accessing a food bank have a disabled inhabitant. Data from the DWP shows that 307,000 households who currently receive the daily living part of PIP needed to use a food bank in the past year. This is 3 times the rate of food bank usage among households in general and illustrates the significant hardship disabled households face. Yes, we have problems. Yes, there are too many people needing welfare support, but let's attack the reasons for that rather than simply cut the financial envelope associated with those services. Let's build a system that reflects the founding principles of the welfare state, of compassion and fairness, recognising the challenges of the 21st century, but removes the remaining obstacles to make sure that all people can live fulfilling and worthwhile lives.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to congratulate the member for Stoke Newington and Hackney North, or maybe even the other way round. And it was, and I actually applied myself for this very debate last week, but I'm delighted that the mother of the house came out of the hat, or maybe the Speaker chose her for today. So I'm delighted that you've led the charge very ably. And it is about dignity. It is about independence, and something that I reflect to myself, well, what's the point of being an MP? The point of being an MP is giving people agency over their own lives, and that is what PIP does in shed loads, is giving people with disability agency over their own lives. In my own constituency of Torbay, there are 8,592 people who claim PIP. That is 12% of our working age population against an average, national average of 8% who claim PIP. So I have the honour of representing the most deprived Liberal Democrat constituency in the country, and I do live that, some of that myself, being disabled myself. And there are real challenges that we face. It is the highest area of interest for those who come to our CAB system in Torbay. I've also met a couple of people only this week coming to take part in events. A disabled gentleman, blind gentleman from Portsmouth, was sharing with me how he has PIP there to back him up if things go wrong with his access to work, and sadly things regularly go wrong with the access to work. Sister and the Minister will know I've crossed swords with him on this before. Also, there was a young lady I met only yesterday who has mental health challenges. She's able to get into therapy. Sadly, that wouldn't be there, and she'd be spiralling in a mental health doom loop if she didn't have the PIP to be able to support her. With pleasure.
Thank you for giving way. In Stratford-on-Avon, I've heard from constituents who fear the welfare reforms could actually undermine their ability to remain in employment. And would my honourable friend agree that many of our constituents rely on PIP as a crucial support that allows them to overcome the barriers as they face in staying in work?
Thank you. And I think this is the crucial thing, is that if it is about getting people back into work, PIP is often, my colleague is quite right, PIP is there to support of getting people back into work. But we go back to what ministers have said, and whether it is the DWP, Secretary of State, the Chancellor or the Prime Minister, they all say the benefit system is broken. So let us make sure we reform it with some compassion. Liberal Democrats would like to see a benefit system that is reformed, but done in a way with people with disabilities, rather than foisting it upon them. So we know that the OBR have come back and said there's no evidence that this will get people back into employment. 300,000 people will actually end up being in poverty with these cuts that we're looking at before us. Also, the fact that PIP is a passport to other benefits. Carers allowance often is married to this, and what we often see is, with these proposals, a number of households across the country could lose £12,000 at the household, which would be massive if they lost PIP and carers allowance at the same time. A couple of case studies I just really want to touch on. One from Scope, a gentleman called Anthony, PTSD and also autism he suffers from. He gets 13 points. Brilliant. But sadly, all of those points are collected up under that 4-point threshold. So that is extremely concerning. He is worried sick about being able to afford, and he's a gentleman who works part-time. CAB in Torbay reached out to me about a lady whose condition got worse. She was assessed. Sadly, she lost PIP. And it feels as if she's almost a harbinger of what would go wrong for other people, because now she's not able to meet her living costs, particularly her housing costs. So that is a massive challenge for her. So I've got a few questions for the Minister, Chairman, if you'd indulge me. I'm particularly interested to know from the Minister why introduce this cruel cuts to PIP without undertaking reform in advance. And one of our colleagues highlighted this earlier on, a couple of our colleagues, when there was change around DLA to PIP, academics have found that there were about 600 suicides at that time. As this cohort is much, much larger, has the Minister undertaken an assessment of how many suicides there will be? Is it over 1,000? And what mitigations will the Minister share with us this afternoon that they have taken into account to make sure that we don't hit those figures, which are extremely scary? And as the Mother of the House highlighted earlier on, there was a by-election in the not-too-distant past. Will the Minister please listen to the people who spoke in that by-election and make sure that some of the most deprived communities don't have the hearts ripped out of them by cuts to PIP? Thank you.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and it's a pleasure to participate. I want to acknowledge the very powerful speeches made by all members this afternoon, and to acknowledge my very deep respect for the Right Honourable Lady. Nobody speaks with greater sincerity and authority on behalf of people who are marginalised and disadvantaged in our society, and I pay tribute to her and her work and her contribution today. I want to say a quick word about the history, as mention has been made, of the Conservative time in office. And I want to acknowledge that genuine mistakes, I think, were made in the design of the welfare system that we have now. The system is clearly not perfect, but it very much was not perfect before. In 2010, the system was extremely complex, very high rates of benefit dependency. The introduction of universal credit and PIP helped to rationalise and bring greater order to the system and reward work rather than welfare, and significant improvements were made in that regard, including improvements in the numbers of disabled people who were able to work and supported in work. Just in the last year of our time in government, 300,000 more disabled people were in work than the year before. So there was genuine improvement. Nevertheless, there was not enough support given to many welfare recipients. And that is the consequence of the fiscal inheritance that we had after 2010, but also of choices made by the coalition government that fell particularly hard on local authorities and on the DWP. So I want to acknowledge that point that's often made by honourable members. And then something else happened around 2017, 2018, and then even more so after COVID. We saw a significant rise in the number of people who were in receipt of health and disability benefits, including in the higher categories of UC health, and people being stuck on benefits, in many cases, indefinitely and forever. And we've seen, and this is what I think explains the imperative of reform that the government is responding to, which is that we see numbers of people on the high rates of UC increased by a third over the previous 5 years. The PIP budget is growing by 50% in this Parliament alone. So the fact is the benefit bill is unsustainable. But it is also true that the system can be inhumane and ungenerous. So we have a paradox that we have a system that is bloated overall, unsustainably large budgets we are facing, and yet on the front line, in terms of people's actual experience, the system is starved. They are starving, but in terms of the consequence of the inadequacy of benefits for many people. So this is a huge opportunity and an imperative for reform, genuine reform, not just the soundbite. I notice we don't have any reform MPs, unless... No. Reform MPs attending today. We genuinely need real reform. In 2024, the government that I supported had plans to bring in further reforms to the benefit system. We did not have the opportunity to introduce those reforms, thanks to the public. The honourable members here were elected with a huge majority. And it is my regret and surprise, Madam Chair, that after 14 years of complaints about government welfare reforms, the Labour Party entered government apparently without any plans to change the system. And we spent 8 months waiting for reforms to be introduced, only to get what we have now, which is a crude and cruel set of cuts, not reforming the system at all, purely in response to what the Chancellor has done to the British economy, which has induced a fiscal crisis and caused the Treasury to demand of the DWP that swingeing cuts are made to the welfare budget, but without any opportunity to reform the system or to reduce demand for welfare, which is, of course, what we should be doing if we want to bring down the bills. There are also, of course, increasing taxes. I won't discuss that, including on employers, which makes it much harder for people to move from welfare into work. And they're removing a vital support from pensioners with the winter fuel payment cut. Happy to give way.
Thanks very much for giving way. Would the honourable gentleman care to say to the floor of the House here this afternoon how much the Her Majesty's opposition are proposing to cut from the welfare bill?
I'm very grateful. Well, the honourable gentleman won't be surprised to know that, and will be gratified to know, we're not in government. It's not for us to come forward with precise plans. We had a manifesto commitment to reduce benefit spending and to reform both disability benefits and UC at the end of the last Parliament. We're now in a position of policy formulation, so I'm afraid I'm not able to tell him exactly what we would do at the present time. The purpose of my role here is to challenge the government on why they've taken so long to come forward with the absence of meaningful reform plans. I do want to see benefit spending reduce, perhaps in contradiction to the honourable gentleman. I think we spend too much on welfare in this country, but that is because we have social breakdown, we have poverty, and the answer to that is not simply to cut benefits without reforming the system, but to reduce the drivers of poverty that we have. So I recognise many of the problems with PIP, and I understand the imperative for change. And honourable members have made the case very powerfully about how inadequate the system is currently, particularly for people with fluctuating conditions. And we've heard very powerful testimony from that, including on the Work and Pensions Select Committee, which many honourable members and the chairman is here. We've been taking evidence on that. In fact, just this morning we heard powerful evidence from people talking about the mental health and how, while people who have a set of very complex interconnected needs might not reach the 4 points on any one measure, and nevertheless could lose PIP under this proposal. Also, I've read evidence from the MS Society, which makes the same point. 48% of PIP recipients with MS don't reach 4 points in any one of the measures, so they would be at risk as well. So I'm very concerned on behalf of those individuals. And I'm very concerned that we don't even know how many there are, and members have made the point. I took a Freedom of Information request to get this figure of 1.3 million out of the government. That wasn't the figure that was officially released. As the Liberal Democrat spokesman just said, we're also unclear about the effect on passported benefits, which I think is a very significant question for the government to answer. And most of all, we don't know what the assessment review, which the government has announced, will come forward with, and yet we are making the cut before we understand how the method of assessing eligibility will be reformed. So I implore the Minister, we need a pause in this, in the measures introduced in the Green Paper. We need a proper review, not just of the assessment, but of the way the whole system works. Absolutely, we need to bring down the benefits bill, but as I've said, we do that by reducing demand for welfare, and many of the levers there, of course, are outside the DWP. Nevertheless, we should redesign the system itself because of the many problems with it that I've identified, and we should do that, as members have said, with claimants, not to them. So, lastly, Chair, let me just emphasise, people voted for change in 2024. They're not getting it. The Prime Minister promises more of the same, to go further and faster with the course that he's already on. I deeply regret what he's doing. I have very great respect for the Minister, and few people have spoken with greater authority and conviction and expertise on the subject of welfare in our Parliament in recent times. I have great sympathy for him having to defend this policy position, which I don't think he would have defended in opposition. And I want to echo the points made by the members for York Central, for Hayes and Hollington, and of course for Hackney North, when they say Labour should be better than this. I agree, we should all be better than this. And my party will stand with members opposing these measures. Thank you.
Before I call the Minister, I would just like to kindly request that there may be a couple minutes left at the end for the Honourable Member who has brought this debate to the Westminster Hall to have a final closing word. Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. I'm also pleased to be serving under your chairmanship. And I also, like everyone else, want to congratulate my right honourable friend for securing the debate and the way she introduced it, and pay tribute to her for her consistent focus on this very important topic for a long time. And to everyone who's spoken, I'd say this is a topic that is absolutely right to be passionate about. The Pathways to Work Green Paper in March sets out to deliver three things in a properly thought-through plan, contrary to what the honourable member opposite just said. First, to provide proper, tailored employment support, again, for people out of work on health and disability grounds, with the biggest reforms to support for a generation and a funding commitment rising to an additional £1 billion a year by the end of this Parliament. Second, removing the disincentives to work left behind in the benefit system by the last government's haphazard benefit freezes, which force too many people to aspire to so-called LCWRA status when it should be supporting people to aspire to work and providing the support to enable them to achieve those aspirations. So we've announced, it's been mentioned in the debate, the first ever permanent real terms increase in the Universal Credit Standard Allowance. But third, and this is where we focused in this debate, making the cost of PIP sustainable and addressing the unsustainable increases which have led to almost to a doubling of the real term cost of the benefit since the year before the pandemic, from 12 billion to 22 last year. And last year alone it rose by 2.8 billion beyond inflation. And that is a trend which I think everybody who's spoken in this debate would recognise we simply cannot just let carry on. 30 years ago, I think I'm right, my right honourable friend and I served together on the Treasury Select Committee. And I know she knows as well as anybody the need for funding to be sustainable. It is not in the interests of those for whom PIP is a lifeline in anything beyond the very short term for the government simply to allow the costs to rise as over the last 5 years. And I will give way just once, but that's all I can manage. Yeah.
I wonder whether he's seen the latest analysis from the New Economics Foundation, which estimates that actually fewer than 50% of disabled people are claiming these benefits, as well as the acceptance rate remaining static. So it's actually not the case that people are claiming who shouldn't be claiming. It's that people are claiming benefits to which they are entitled.
No, I think she's absolutely right. The people who are getting PIP are people who meet the criteria. My point is, we cannot simply carry on increasing spending at the current rate. That has to be addressed. But I well understand the concerns about all of this among people who claim PIP, and I want to take the opportunity of this debate to address those concerns. We are talking to disabled people, to disability charities, to disabled people's organisations. The Green Paper consultation will continue until the end of June, and after that a white paper will follow later this year. But we need to act ahead of a white paper. Claims to PIP set to more than double, from 2 million to over 4.3 million this decade, partly accounted for by a 17% increase in disability prevalence that's been mentioned, but the increase in benefit caseload is much, much higher. And it would certainly not be in the interest of people currently claiming the benefits for the government to bury its head in the sand over that rate of increase. So following the Green Paper, we're consulting on how best to support those affected by the eligibility changes. We're looking to improve the PIP assessment. As been mentioned, I'm going to lead a review of that. But the current system produces poor employment outcomes, high economic inactivity, low living standards, high cost to the taxpayer. It needs to change. We want a more proactive, pro-work system that supports people better and supports the economy as well. But let me turn specifically to the changes to eligibility for PIP, because PIP is a crucial benefit that contributes to the extra living costs arising from disability or a health impairment. The changes we've announced relate to PIP daily living. PIP mobility component is not affected. We are clear that PIP daily living should not be means tested, should not be taxed, should not be frozen, or other things that have been suggested. We're committed to continue to increase it in line with inflation. And for the majority of current claimants, and categorically for the most vulnerable, who've been highlighted in this debate, it will continue to provide in full the support it provides at present, And employment support for those who are able and want to work will be substantially improved as well. We've published data, which has been referenced in the debate, showing that just over half of those who claim PIP today scored 4 points in one daily living activity in their last PIP assessment. So understandably, as we've heard, almost half of those who currently claim the benefit will be concerned they won't be eligible in future. But we've also published the assessment of the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is that by 2029-30, in fact, only around 10% of those who currently claim PIP daily living will lose it as a result of these changes. And that is the assumption that's gone into the spending forecasts. So spending on PIP, we're projecting, will continue to increase in real terms every year, but not at the unsustainable rate of the last 5 years. And I'm afraid I can't give way again. But I think the OBR is right on this. Their assessment is based on previous experience of changes of this kind, behaviour changes, both the behaviour of people claiming the benefit and of those who conduct the assessments. And, for example, I've met people who were awarded 2 points for one of the activities last time round, who I thought were entitled to 4, but it didn't change their award, so it wasn't challenged and nobody minded. But in future, someone in that position could well score 4 points on that activity and so retain the benefit even though they didn't score 4 points on any of the activities last time around. Changes to the PIP assessment will not be immediate. They'll take effect from November next year, November 2026. For a given individual, they'll only take I can't give way again. A lot of points have been raised in the debate. For a given individual, they'll only take effect at their first award review after that date. Award reviews take place on average about 3-year intervals, so for many PIP claimants the change would only take effect a year or two after November 2026. And in line with existing practice, people who are above state pension age won't normally be reassessed and so won't be affected at all. And if and when people are reassessed, it will be by a trained assessor. The assessment will be of their individual needs and circumstances, and we're consulting on how best to support those who lose entitlement, including those who lose carers allowance, who are explicitly flagged up in the Green Paper. Across both PIP and WCA assessments, we set out in the Green Paper plans to improve trust in the way those assessments work, and many of us have heard worries about that, and through reviewing our approach to safeguarding recording assessments as standard, so that when something does go wrong with the assessment, we can look back and look at the recording and see what happened, improving the assessment for next time, moving back to having more face-to-face assessments, continuing to meet the needs of people who may require different methods of assessment. I think I've just got time to give way to my honourable friend, the member for High Peak.
Didn't get there because I've been listening to carers who've been sharing their stories. I spoke to a woman who's caring for her husband with a neurodegenerative disease who currently only scores 2 across the board. Their family would be penalised under the tightening restrictions. I just want the Minister, would you agree with me that somebody with a neurological and degenerative disease should be counted as severely disabled and protected from these changes?
Well, I'd be very happy to talk to my honourable friend about the details of that particular case. I think the threshold we've set is the right place to set the eligibility criteria in the future, and very happy to discuss that point specifically. Dr. Alan Khan, our goal is a system that's financially sustainable in the long term, so it can be there for all of us who need it in the future.
Diana, wind up.
Madam Chair, the Minister has repeated again this line that the numbers of people claiming PIP has shot up and there must be something dubious about that. I asked him to look at the new Economics Foundation report, which came out today, I think, which said the reason the numbers claiming have gone up is a rise in the number of disabled people, a rise in deprivation, long COVID, and the pressures on the NHS. The Minister said that we were asking the government to put their head in their hands. No, we're just asking the government to talk to the disabled and their supporters and not ram through legislation without giving us sufficient information. This cruel and misconceived legislation will not end well politically, and meanwhile, millions of the disabled will live in fear.
Question is that this House has considered personal independence payment and disabled people. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you. That was spicy. But thanks for your advice. Rowena. Don't want to keep it messy. Just do this, Edward. Oh no, that's a different one.
Rebecca Paul.